Imagine a country deploying like 8,000 of its own elite military troops to protect its closest regional ally.
Right, a massive show of force.
Exactly. Just a hard line drawn in the sand against an imminent invasion by its worst enemy.
A classic geopolitical move, yeah.
But then imagine that at the exact same moment, that very same country is quietly hiding a squadron of that exact enemy's most advanced fighter jets.
Inside its own borders.
Yes. Hiding them specifically to protect them from a superpower's missile strikes. I mean, it sounds like a glitch in the Matrix, right?
It really does. It's a paradox that, honestly, it should cause the entire international system to just crash completely.
Yeah. But today, we're looking at why, in our modern multipolar world, that kind of paradox is literally just considered Tuesday.
We're basically watching the death of the unipolar world in real time.
Which is wild to think about. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way. If you're joining us, you already know the mission.
We take a stack of really dense sources, articles, deep-cut blogs, research, and we extract the actual mechanics of how things work.
Right. The goal is to give you, the listener, a shortcut to being well-informed. We skip the academic jargon, but we make sure to keep those big aha moments.
And our focus today is just a fascinating piece of writing.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's a highly satirical May 23, 2026 blog post from a platform called Barackface.
Which is quite the name.
Yeah, the author claims to have been Barack Obama's first full-time volunteer in New York City. And he wrote this piece that uses high-level theoretical physics to explain international diplomacy.
Specifically, he posits that Pakistan has achieved what he calls a quantum breakthrough in international relations.
A quantum breakthrough. I love that phrasing.
It's so good, because while the piece is dripping with satire, it manages to capture the incredibly complex, contradictory realities of our world today.
A world where financial survival has basically just overridden ideological loyalty entirely.
Exactly. And just to be clear up front, we are strictly analyzing the architectural mechanics of this geopolitical commentary today.
Oh, we aren't here to evaluate the morality of it.
No, not at all. We aren't taking political sides regarding the U.S. or Pakistan or Iran or Saudi Arabia. We just want to understand the engine of this new diplomatic reality.
Okay, let's unpack this. The author's opening premise really sets the foundation for the whole thing.
Yeah, they argue that Pakistan's foreign policy has officially abandoned what they call boring old Newtonian rules.
Right, and instead it exists in contradictory states until it's observed.
Which is a brilliant way to phrase it.
It is. For anyone who, follows international relations, Newtonian statecraft is basically predictable cause and effect.
Right. Newtonian physics relies on predictable outcomes. An object in motion stays in motion.
So in statecraft, you sign a treaty, you commit troops, and boom, an alliance is formed.
Exactly. If you sign a mutual defense pact with Washington, your relationship with Moscow will predictably degrade. It's just action and equal reaction.
But the author is suggesting that this linear model is just completely obsolete now.
They are. By bringing in the concept of quantum superposition, the satire proposes a framework where a nation can occupy multiple, completely mutually exclusive geopolitical positions simultaneously.
And there's this fantastic joke in the text about spooky action at a distance.
Oh yeah, Einstein coined that phrase, right?
He did, yeah. Because he couldn't stand the idea that particles could instantaneously interact across vast distances without some physical mechanism.
It bothered him so much.
And the Pakistani official in the story just laughs it off. He's like, Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. We call it Tuesday.
It's such a perfect punchline.
But I do need to challenge the premise here for a second.
Go for it.
I mean, if I tell two rival colleagues that I'm fully supporting both of their competing proposals for a company restructuring,
Right.
I'm not existing in a state of quantum superposition. I'm just a two-faced liar hedging my bets until one of them wins.
That's a fair point, yeah.
So how is this superposition diplomacy genuinely different from just standard, political deception?
Well, what's fascinating here is that deception relies on the illusion of singularity.
What do you mean?
In your example, you're trying to convince both colleagues that they have your exclusive loyalty. You're hoping the lie holds until the outcome is decided.
Right, I'm hiding it.
Exactly. But what the author is describing here is a structural reality where all the parties involved are fully aware of the contradictions.
Wait, they know?
Yes, everyone knows, but the system functions anyway. The satire elevates this from just lying to a state of enlightened systemic survival.
Oh, wow, so it's not a secret.
No, it suggests that in a multipolar environment, these contradictions aren't a bug. They're a feature.
Because if a nation committed entirely to one bloc, they'd face immediate economic or security collapse from the other side.
Exactly. The superposition isn't a secret lie. It's an openly acknowledged coping mechanism for a fractured globe.
That reframes it completely. It's
Yeah.
less like a liar at a party and more like a massive financial institution running like high-frequency algorithmic trading.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, like they don't actually believe in the underlying companies. They just hold a massive basket of totally conflicting derivatives.
Right. They're shorting and longing the exact same sectors simultaneously.
So they're insulated from the microfluctuations because the contradictions balance out the risk.
Precisely. The system doesn't crash unless there is a catastrophic, unavoidable market event.
Or in this case, what the author calls a measurement.
Right. The measurement is the moment a definitive action is forced.
So as long as a true, unavoidable crisis doesn't require a definitive military or economic choice, the superposition holds.
Yes, the alliances remain both active and inactive at the same time.
Okay, let's look at the specific measurements the author provides to illustrate this, because the Saudi-Iranian paradox is just wild.
It really is the core of the satire.
The article details a scenario where Pakistan deploys those 8,000 troops to Saudi Arabia we talked about.
And the author is very specific about their purpose. These troops are sent to act as a steel wall against any potential Iranian invasion.
Yeah, the Pakistani official in the story whispers, "Brothers must protect brothers."
While casually adjusting his besties with Riyadh baseball cap.
Yes. I loved that detail. So we have this literal, physical, military shield erected to defend Saudi Arabia against Iranian aggression.
A huge commitment.
But then, literally a few paragraphs later, the author reveals that Pakistan recently welcomed a squadron of Iranian fighter jets.
Parked safely on Pakistani soil.
Yeah, far away from any potential United States missile strikes.
And that same official who was just wearing the Riyadh hat.
He's now sporting an IRGC fan club lanyard.
It's hilarious. He smiles and declares Iran a peace-loving nation.
I mean, just think about the sheer scale of the paradox being laid out here. If you track the historical friction in that region.
The proxy conflicts,
Yeah.
the deep-seated ideological divides.
Right, between Riyadh and Tehran, it's mind-bending. Pakistan is actively shielding Saudi Arabia from Iran while using its own sovereign territory to protect Iran's highest value military assets.
Assets they are hiding from the United States.
Right. And the U.S. happens to be Saudi Arabia's primary global backer.
The logical endpoint of that scenario is a systemic collapse. I mean, if you apply traditional geopolitical analysis, this balancing act is completely unsustainable.
It should trigger massive retaliatory sanctions from the U.S., right?
Absolutely. And a withdrawal of financial support from Saudi Arabia, plus heightened border hostility from Iran.
But it doesn't, and the author introduces this concept of a Schrodinger's alliance to explain why the region hasn't just short-circuited.
Because until a war forces the issue, all three alliances with the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and Iran remain simultaneously perfectly intact and entirely worthless.
It's brilliant because it highlights the paralysis of the superpowers in this dynamic.
Yeah, the United States cannot afford to push Pakistan completely into the arms of Beijing or Tehran, so they just tolerate the hidden fighter jets.
And Saudi Arabia needs the military main power, so they ignore the backdoor dealings.
Exactly. The quantum state holds because the superpowers are just too afraid of what happens if they open the box and collapse the waveform.
The piece even points out that if the box ever did open, Pakistan would just issue a press release stating they were never inside the box to begin with.
Classic plausible deniability.
So true. But the military deployments are only, like, the visible, flashy side of this diplomacy.
Right. The real mechanics are much more grounded.
Yeah, the actual vascular system of this quantum state lies in trade and logistics. The source transitions from fighter jets to supply chains.
Specifically focusing on the overland routes. And logistics often reveal the true nature of an alliance much more clearly than military posturing ever could.
Oh, absolutely. So the author outlines a scenario where the ocean route to Iran is effectively shut down by a blockade.
A massive naval choke point.
And in response, Pakistan seamlessly transitions into what the author calls the region's premier overland Amazon delivery service.
Which is such a funny image.
The logistics officer in the satire just shrugs off the naval blockade completely. He says, "The sea is closed, no problem. We'll just take the scenic route through Balochistan."
And the manifest of goods flowing across this supposedly tense border is incredibly specific.
Yeah, it lists commercial goods, spare machinery parts, IRGC generals, and mostly their kebabs.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, The inclusion of the kebabs is a fantastic comedic detail, but the underlying geopolitical point is actually profound.
How so?
Well, we operate under the assumption that massive naval fleets and economic sanctions are definitive Newtonian actions.
Right. A superpower declares a maritime blockade, and the global community assumes the target nation is isolated.
Exactly. But the overland bypass through Balochistan exposes the futility of maritime dominance when a neighboring landmass is willing to act as a porous membrane.
It's like it operates like a geopolitical VPN.
A VPN. I like that.
Yeah, think about it. A government blocks a website on the main network, so you just fire up a virtual private network.
Right.
You route your traffic through a server in a different country, and boom, you access the exact same data. Pakistan is acting as a physical VPN for Iranian cargo.
That physical VPN analogy perfectly captures the dynamic.
Because the superpower spends billions deploying aircraft carriers to lock the front door, while the neighboring country just quietly runs a fiber optic cable of spare parts and kebabs through the back window.
Right, and the complexity of the Balochistan region makes it the ideal routing node for this kind of activity.
Because it's so vast, right?
It's vast, and it's historically a very difficult to control territory. It is deeply entrenched local trade networks that predate modern national borders by centuries.
So the satire is pointing out that trying to impose a clean binary blockade on a region like that is just an exercise in futility.
Completely. It's functioned as a fluid transactional corridor forever.
But operating a physical VPN for a heavily sanctioned neighbor carries immense risk, doesn't it?
Oh, huge risk.
Yeah.
You're inviting the wrath of the nation enforcing the blockade.
Right. So what drives a country to maintain this incredibly volatile state of superposition?
Well, the author provides an answer through a foreign ministry spokesperson that is, frankly, refreshingly devoid of any ideological spin.
Yeah, they strip away all the usual diplomatic rhetoric. No talk about shared values or historical brotherhood or regional stability.
They replace all of that with pure macroeconomic reality.
I'm going to read the exact quote because it really is the linchpin of the entire article.
Go ahead.
The spokesperson says, look, our policy is very consistent. We are 100% committed to whoever is paying the electricity bill this month. We have deep historical, cultural, and financial ties with all parties, especially the financial ones. Did I mention the financial ones?
It's brutal honesty. When a nation faces severe balance of payments crises, crippling energy shortages, and massive external debt obligations.
Ideology becomes an unaffordable luxury.
Exactly. The satire isolates financial pragmatism as the singular unifying force behind all this chaos.
So the contradictory alliances aren't a grand chess match, they're just a scramble for liquidity.
Yes, and the electricity bill isn't a metaphor here. It is the literal mechanism of state survival.
Right, because if the power grids fail, the factories stop, civil unrest begins, and the government falls.
Which puts the author's concept of the diplomacy uncertainty principle into really sharp perspective.
Oh man, the diplomacy uncertainty principle, they joked that Pakistani scientists were applying for a Nobel Prize for that.
Yeah, the author plays on Heisenberg's uncertainty principle by suggesting that the more precisely you measure Pakistan's commitment to one specific alliance, the less you know about their commitment to anything else.
Okay, give me an example of how that works in practice.
So, if Saudi Arabia deposits billions into the central bank to stabilize the currency, you can be absolutely certain of Pakistan's alignment with Riyadh on that specific day.
Because they just paid the bill?
Right. But your certainty regarding their stance on Iranian energy imports or U.S. counterterrorism initiatives instantly drops to zero.
Because the focus is entirely localized on the transaction, the journalist in the article actually challenges the spokesperson on this, asking if this strategy isn't incredibly dangerous.
And the spokesperson just laughs it off.
Yeah, he says, risky. My friend, this is Pakistan. We invented playing both sides. We were doing it before it was cool. We were doing it while it was still in the womb.
It's such a great line.
It is. But let's stress test this for a second. The author refers to the country as a geopolitical particle accelerator.
Which is a very deliberate choice of words.
Right, because in physics, particle accelerators are highly controlled environments, but they are dealing with immense volatile energy.
Exactly.
So you smash these contradictory alliances together at high speeds, hoping to extract funding from the collisions. Doesn't that eventually result in a critical failure? Like, at what point does it just explode?
Well, the constant risk of a containment failure is actually what defines the strategy.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The nation is operating on the edge of volatility, managing the collisions rather than preventing them entirely.
But aren't they worried about it blowing up in their face?
It relies on the assumption that none of the external powers want the accelerator to actually explode.
Ah, because the fallout would be too bad for everyone.
It's exactly. The US, Saudi Arabia, and China all have a vested interest in preventing a total state collapse in a nuclear-armed nation of over 240 million people.
That makes total sense. The financial pragmatism works specifically because the surrounding superpowers view this chaotic superposition as slightly preferable to a complete vacuum.
Right, a vacuum would be disastrous, which naturally leads us to observe how those superpowers are actually handling this reality day to day.
Because if you're sitting in a legacy diplomatic institution like, say, the U.S. State Department, you are trained to deal with treaties, long-term doctrines, clear lines of demarcation.
You expect the Newtonian rules.
Exactly. But the author describes the global reaction from these legacy institutions as a mixture of confusion, gratitude, and mild existential dread.
That existential dread is very real when your entire framework is being dismantled.
Here's where it gets really interesting. There is this phenomenal quote from an anonymous U.S. official who has just totally given up trying to map out the strategy.
What do they say?
He just stares off into the distance and mutters, "They're not even pretending anymore. They're just vibing."
I love that they used that word. Introducing the slang term vibing into a breakdown of nuclear-armed statecraft is incredibly deliberate.
It's so jarring, but it works so well.
It highlights the vast disconnect between 20th century geopolitical doctrine and 21st century survival tactics.
Right, because if you consider the rigid doctrines of the past, the Monroe Doctrine, the Carter Doctrine, mutually assured destruction.
Those were massive, immovable architectural structures.
Yes, but if a nation is simply vibing, they have completely abandoned the architectural blueprint.
They're walking into the room, reading the immediate energy, looking at the current balance sheet, and adapting their foreign policy in real time.
Literally just going with the flow of whoever has the cash.
And a nation that vibes is immune to traditional pressure campaigns.
Because you cannot sanction a vibe.
Exactly. The target will simply flow around the obstacle like water. It is a highly algorithmic reactive state of being.
So the legacy superpower shows up with this rigid 500-page strategic framework.
And the multipolar actor counters by simply riding the wave of whatever geopolitical crisis offers the best immediate return on investment.
And when confronted with the absolute confusion this causes, the Pakistani Foreign Office in the Satire sends out a beautifully cryptic tweet.
It says, "Position cannot be determined, velocity uncertain. Please do not observe too closely."
Please do not observe too closely. It's incredible.
That tweet is the thesis statement of the entire blog post. It's a demand for plausible deniability.
Because if you look too close, the whole thing falls apart.
Exactly. Please do not observe too closely is the fundamental requirement for superposition diplomacy to function.
So if a superpower forces a public, undeniable measurement like demanding an absolute choice between Riyadh and Tehran or Washington and Beijing,
The wave function collapses. The contradictions become untenable. The system relies entirely on everyone agreeing to keep the geopolitical lens slightly out of focus.
it really is just a collective agreement to ignore the glitch in the matrix.
That's exactly what it is.
Now, to truly grasp why this specific author chose to view international relations through the lens of quantum mechanics and systems architecture, we have to pull back a bit.
We need to look at the broader context of the source material.
Yeah, we need to examine the author's multiverse.
Analyzing the metadata and the surrounding environment of a blog provides critical insight into the underlying framework the author applies to the world.
So we're looking at this platform called Brackface, and it's written by someone named Paramendra.
And this site boasts over 5 million page views.
Yeah, and an archive tracking back over 2 decades, all the way to 2004. So this isn't just a casual observer dropping a hot take.
No, this is someone who has been publishing continuously through massive technological and political shifts.
And the sidebar of this blog is a wild, overwhelming landscape of hyper-advanced theoretical concepts.
This raises an important question. What do the titles promoted on the site reveal about the author's mind?
Well, they show someone completely obsessed with next-generation systems, artificial intelligence, and macro-logistics. Just listen to the scope of these books and essays they're promoting.
Let's hear them.
We have physical AWS, how the logistics cloud will reshape global commerce and ignite the age of abundance.
Okay, wow.
Then there is Lumina AI, the trillion-dollar sun. We see agentic AI, set to explode in 2026.
Very focused on AI.
Yeah. Then there's a framework called Calciism, the economic and spiritual blueprint for an age of abundance. And finally, precigenetics, the technology that lets us watch life think, how photons, cells, and AI may help us cure cancer and rewrite medicine.
That is an intense lineup. But if you dissect those titles, a very clear pattern emerges.
What's the pattern?
Take physical AWS. It suggests applying the frictionless, scalable, on-demand nature of cloud computing to physical global logistics.
Like treating cargo ships and trucks the same way Amazon Web Services treats data packets.
Exactly. And agentic AI deals with artificial intelligence systems that don't just answer prompts, but execute complex, multi-step goals autonomously in the real world.
So they're acting as independent agents.
Right. This author views the planet not as a collection of sovereign states with hard borders, but as a massive interconnected network of routing protocols, energy flows, and autonomous systems.
Oh, that makes so much sense. It explains the Balochistan overland Amazon delivery joke perfectly.
Right, because if you view the world through the lens of physical AWS, a maritime blockade isn't a geopolitical crisis.
It's literally just a severed server connection.
Exactly. This system simply reroutes the physical data, the spare parts, and the kebabs through the next available node.
Which just happens to be the Balochistan corridor.
Yes. The author's techno-futurist perspective renders traditional diplomacy completely absurd.
Because it is. I mean, when you are conceptualizing trillion-dollar solar energy grids and AI systems that can independently restructure global supply chains.
The idea of diplomats in suits arguing over lines on a map feels incredibly primitive.
It feels like they're playing checkers while the rest of the world is building a quantum computer.
Precisely. The quantum physics metaphor in the satire is born out of a deep frustration with legacy systems.
The author is watching these nations try to operate on Newtonian principles while the global economy and the technological landscape have already transitioned into a quantum state.
And the sidebar news links on the site provide an even sharper image of this fragmented reality.
Yeah, let's talk about those links because the author curates a mix that perfectly mirrors the cognitive dissonance of the Schrödinger's alliance.
It's a very specific vibe.
It really is. You have a map detailing the spread of Ebola in Central Africa.
It's heavy stuff.
Right next to it, an article exploring Sundar Pichai's thoughts on AI anxiety. And below that, a grim warning about the Strait of Hormuz and naval conflicts in Asia's waterways.
So you have high-stakes biological threats, the existential dread of artificial intelligence, and global maritime choke points.
And nested seamlessly among all those apocalyptic warnings is a link to a Wired magazine piece declaring that LL Bean's Zip Hunter's tote is the only carry-all you need.
That juxtaposition right there is the modern human experience distilled into a single webpage.
It really is. It's so funny, but also kind of terrifying.
We process the potential collapse of global trade routes and the marketing of Candace tote bags simultaneously.
Our brains are just constantly existing in that state of superposition.
The world itself is in a state of superposition, where catastrophic threats and mundane consumerism share the exact same bandwidth.
It's a chaotic, multipolar reality, and the author's satire simply reflects that chaos back onto the nation's state.
It's a brilliant way to frame it.
So synthesizing everything we've pulled from this May 2026 Deep Cut blog post, we've seen how a brilliant piece of satire used the diplomacy uncertainty principle to explain the unexplainable.
And we analyze how financial pragmatism, the desperate need to just pay the electricity bill, forces nations to abandon ideological consistency.
Yeah, acting as physical VPNs to bypass superpower blockades. We observed the shift from structural 20th century diplomatic architecture to a model where multipolar actors survive by simply vibing through contradictions.
Relying entirely on the reluctance of major powers to observe the situation too closely.
It just proves that if you really want to understand the mechanics of the modern world, sometimes a dense 500-page academic white paper on regional hegemony is way less useful than a sharp satirical joke about a logistics officer sneaking IRGC kebabs through a mountain pass.
Oh, without a doubt. Humor cuts through the institutional pretense and exposes the raw economic engine underneath.
So true.
But, the mechanics of this quantum diplomacy are undeniably effective for short-term survival.
Right, they get the bills paid today.
But if we extrapolate this out, it raises a deeply unsettling question for the future of international relations.
What's up?
Well, if nations are no longer bound by predictable doctrines, but instead operate in a constant state of superposition, based entirely on immediate transactional needs, What happens when the entire global south realizes they can play this game?
Oh, wow.
If every developing nation decides to become a highly volatile geopolitical particle accelerator, smashing conflicting superpower interests together for profit, who is actually steering the ship?
That's a terrifying thought.
And what happens when the first accelerator inevitably breaches containment?
That is a staggering question to leave off on.
Well,
We are transitioning from a world of neat architectural blueprints into a blurry, unpredictable quantum cloud where treaties only matter until the electricity bill comes due.
it's a brave new world out there.
It really is. I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive. As you consume the news this week, look past the rigid declarations of alliance and try to spot the underlying financial pragmatism.
And just remember, don't observe the paradox too closely.
Or you might collapse the waveform. Catch you next time.